Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, in which Craig Touch, myself, Roland Hume, get to chat to some very interesting figures in the world of self-publishing, traditional publishing, editing, everything to do with this crazy industry that we are in. And today we are very excited to be joined by a special guest, Jerry Manus, who writes under the name JB Manus. And is it your dog who is also very keen to be involved in this podcast?
Yes, it is.
How are you doing today, Jerry?
He's either barking at the neighbors or the lawn, people mowing lawns. Doing well.
Excellent. And we wouldn't be here without them. Yeah, you're in Philadelphia, aren't you? We were quite close. Yeah. And we wouldn't be here, of course, without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
I'm doing well. It's getting cold over here too, so we're all we can all commiserate about that. Summer's over. Sucks. So yeah, we're happy to have you on, Jared, because one of the things that we talk about a lot is sort of, and I guess we have sort of a bias towards self-publishing, right? We talk to traditional publishers as well, but the idea that self-publishing has all these pros of higher royalties and more control and being able to take chances on what you're writing easier than if you were trying to publish with a big five or with a traditional publisher. And so we talk a lot about that, but sometimes people might think, well, let's all talk, right? Or sometimes there's people out there that think the only people that would self-publish are people that couldn't traditionally published, right? So and that's not the case, but I can see why some people do feel that way, and so I like to have guests on like yourself who have gone the traditional publishing route but then have decided to self-publish instead. So like those sort of arguments that you couldn't be traditionally published, they don't apply, right? You have done that, you've seen the other side, you've seen the dark side, and now you're right, coming to the light, right? So we kind of want to get an idea of like why that is and what the differences are you've seen and stuff. So why don't you tell us a little bit about sort of your journey, what you write, how you got started with trad, and why you've decided to move to self-publishing.
Sure. Well, I've spanned quite a few things, not only self-publishing and traditional publishing, but also nonfiction and fiction. So I started out writing nonfiction on leadership lessons from history, so on business management books, basically. And with those, I went with the traditional publishers. I had an agent. Went with the first one was with Thomas Nelson. That's now part of HarperCollins, and another one was McGraw-Hill, and so on. So I was used to working with the big publishers for that. And then I began writing novels, which I'd say is my first love, probably. And the first one was a small press. And so I guess it's sort of hybrid. But then I decided to go independent for a few different reasons. With the latest one that I have, it crossed genres. So it's a little bit of a crime noir and a little bit of a techno thriller. There's some various elements in it, and with a lot of the publishers, from what my agent was saying, a lot of them, they like to fall into something that's just like something that's out there, but a little different. So something that's either a crime noir or a psychological thriller. And as soon as you start crossing genres, like in my case, I have a character that can read people's memories. So as soon as you start mixing genres, that works very well in film. But in the book market, it seems the publishers, especially these days, are really tightening what they're taking on in terms of falling neatly within a niche. And as soon as you start getting creative, I'm finding you're better off going independent, and where you have control over the cover and the title and writing the book in the way you see fit, as opposed to taking more of almost like an indie filmmaker approach.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they don't want to take chances because these days their income is falling as well. And it's becoming harder and harder for them to market their books against all the competition from, from so many things. People are doing other things, but also, self-publishers are out there and other publishers. And, people are sort of seeing that they can take these chances and do these other things without them. and they're starting to do a lot less from what we're hearing, for the authors, right? They used to take your book and do all this marketing and stuff for it. And now it's like they take your book, but they still kind of expect you to do a lot of the marketing.
That's a good point. Yeah, I was going to mention that. In fact, a traditionally published book, you almost act as if you are independently published. So you have to do all the same work in terms of all the marketing and promotional materials and things.
Right. I never used to do that way.
Yeah, I would say to a certain extent, and maybe my bias is showing here, I've come to the conclusion that a lot of publishers are incompetent. A lot of publishers don't understand what it is these days. I was thinking, I would say, what's that? Because Jerry and I met through the James Bond community, and there's a writer, Kim Sherwood, just published the new James Bond book. And it's so interesting to see how that was so well done in the UK. And then it took them weeks to sort of get their act together in the States about marketing this book and having this book available. I'm like, that's stuff that you should have buttoned up before you even go and publish a book.
I was very surprised at that, actually. I thought even indie authors these days, if you've done your homework, you make sure it's available in the markets that it needs to be in. But from a traditional publisher, I was surprised to see the difficulty in having availability in the U.S.
And it's HarperCollins. I mean, it's not like it's a small little independent publishing house. It's like one of the big ones.
Yeah, so, that's true. It's true.
So what do you think that was? Do you think it was because they are not focusing enough on marketing books for authors anymore and expected this author to market her own stuff, or that the James Bond would just sell itself and they wouldn't really have to do any marketing? Or, any thoughts on why that is?
I think to a degree it's a little of both, but I think it's not so much even the marketing, which very little was done in the United States. I think there's so much more that could have been done, but it's also the distribution. Even the distribution, if you try, buying like the new Double or Nothing book, which is an excellent book, you try buying in the United States and there's all kinds of mixed messages about when it's available, or is the paperback available or the hardback. And I was thinking, well, this is a traditionally published book. I would have thought that would have been a kind of a no-brainer. But so it makes me wonder what's going on there.
But it's interesting in the lead time as well. I think we heard about that book in the time before you'd published your book, and now your book is out. Yeah. You've got a paperback copy of it right there. It's got some very nice reviews. People have been talking about it. We've had Kirkus talking about it and stuff. So it's interesting how you've managed to accomplish a lot within a very short time frame, whereas a traditional publisher hasn't.
Right, that's true. Is with a traditional publisher, the process is very long, and that's another reason for me, I was working with an agent on this book, and he was very keen on the book, and he's been around a long time. He's one of the top agents, and then he retired, and then I thought, okay, well, going through the process over again with a new agent, and then trying to get things worked out, and then the publishers, you're talking 3 to 6 months before you even land a publishing deal, if you're lucky. And then after you do that, it's another minimum 6 months, sometimes 9, before they actually publish it, because of all the lead times and everything they need to go through. So as an indie author, you can get your books out a lot quicker. And in this case, I wanted to get it out quicker. I wanted to have the creativity to span genres and tell the story I wanted to tell. And it just made sense to go indie with this one.
I mean, that's the lead time is one of the biggest things that people complain about is, you could be finished your book today and it's a great book and everybody loves it. And the publishers the traditional publishers all want to buy it. Maybe there's a bidding war, but it's still not going to get published for a better part of a year. Yeah,
right. And those, I think that's what people hear about. They hear, oh, there's bidding wars, and this one got. I know several people whose books got picked up by big movie producers and are being made into films, and they started out the same place I did, and around the same time. But it's almost like their chances of getting struck by lightning in terms of that. It's not that it can't happen; it can, and I don't want to dissuade anybody from their dreams of that happening. But I think probably a safer route is if you publish an indie book, maybe you don't have a chance of a publisher picking up that very book, but certainly if it does well and you can make it happen, and publishers will take notice. You sell 10,000, 15,000 copies, and then you get publishers knocking on your door for the next book. And so I think that's probably a more realistic route for people getting into the market.
But the irony is, of course, that when the publisher, because I've had publishers approach me because I've sold 68,000 copies of my books, and I'm like, no,
Yeah,
I'm good. I'm good, thanks.
Right.
You send me all those rejection letters.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, publishers might come after you, but then the question is, should you? And in many cases, you're better off, staying indie. I think Dean Koontz just switched from traditional to indie.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Well, one thing, I was very lucky to read your book before you even thought about publishing it, and I get sent a lot of books to read by people I like, and I was really struck right from the get-go by how clearly professional your book was. I mean, it was like publication ready the moment you handed it to me, all edited in Chicago Manual of Style, and it was like, wow.
Yeah.
And it's interesting talking about the genre thing, because it's yeah, I mean, you and I were fans of James Bond, but also there were the elements that were kind of, I got a vibe of those 60s shows like the Avengers and stuff like that, that kind of had the kooky supernatural elements that worked really well, and I enjoyed that. But it's funny how that falls out of the genre trap here, but I think does work very well. What has been the reaction to it now you've published it?
Well, I've gotten a lot of very good reaction. Oddly enough, some of it I didn't expect. Some of the reaction, they liked it because it didn't have the over-the-top violence that's in some of today's thrillers. And I guess some of them like the old school feel to it. But I also wanted to make sure the book was very contemporary. But I took influence from a lot of of course, certainly scenes. I'm sure you notice were an homage to some of the classic Bond stories. But also I was very much inspired by some of the classic Hitchcock films like North by Northwest and To Catch a Thief. In fact, some of it I even reference in the book. So it had sort of like a retro vibe, but set in contemporary time. So that was important to me. And it's funny, it started out when I was talking with my agent. I had this concept of a guy who has the ability, or he calls it a curse, to be able to touch people, and then he sees their most painful or traumatic memories and he experiences it. And I thought, well, he avoids people, he stays at home, he lives with his mother, and his only social life is online. And then, what's going to force him out of his comfort zone? And then he steps out of his comfort zone when he sees about a road rage murder he just has to do something about. And then that's when I thought, okay, well, how do you top that with a villain that's just as interesting? And then I came up with the idea of somebody with the opposite skills, and how are they connected in the past? And that's where it becomes a big mystery. And so it crosses between thriller, mystery, a little bit of crime noir. So the feedback so far has been very positive. I thought people would be maybe confused by the cross genres, but I'm starting to see the readers see it as a strength. Publishers maybe not so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the difficulties with the cross genre is the marketing, right? Do you market it to mystery, or do you market it to thriller, or do you traditional marketing is done sort of by genre, like where you find a place that has readers that read this type of book, and of course you can put it on Facebook and that's everybody, but you still want to target your audience, right? So you can target it to all those things, or you can have different ads that target, because maybe the imagery or the taglines that you use would be better for a mystery or for a thriller.
Absolutely. Yeah. I try to play those in different markets.
Yeah. And I think that that's sort of what scares away the traditional publishers. They don't want that extra work. They don't want to, take a chance and a risk. And that's why, if they're going to people that have sold a lot of copies already, because that risk is already, the author already took that risk and proved that there is an audience. So now they're just trying to capitalize on it, which is kind of, kind of.
And that happens a lot. It happens a lot of times. Look at Harry Potter. I think some 50 or 60 publishers turned it down. They said, "Who wants to read a book about a wizard?" in today's day and age.
Yeah, and you'd think they'd learn their lesson from that, from those big, high-profile turnaways that they did, and then could have been, But hey, it worked out well for J.K. Rowling. So
yeah, that's true.
But I think it's actually kind of cool. Like I hadn't heard that about Dean Koontz, but it's almost like he's sort of turning that whole notion on its head, where the publishers are trying to find these authors that already built up their following, and so that they can sort of have no risk, take that person on, get all their money, and they've already proven themselves. Whereas Koontz spent a lifetime and all his traditional publishers and their resources back in the day when they were actually spending those resources and doing all this marketing, and he built this like massive audience, and now he's like, haha, I'm gonna go the self-publishing route and sell to all those people, and publishers get nothing.
I think once you have an audience, I mean, unless you're offered millions of dollars, once you have an audience, in his case, probably was offered millions, and even then, he realized he was better off publishing independently. And I think, especially once you have an audience, it's like that's gold. And these days, more and more, there's not as much that a traditional publisher is going to do for you, other than get you into national bookstores, but even that's starting to dwindle in terms of more people buying online. And I think as that changes, leveling the playing field between indie and traditional.
Yeah, I'm surprised that more big name authors haven't gone that route, because I financially, I don't think there is anything that they can offer you that would make up for it, right? Because that's all coming out of their share of the profits that they don't want to give you, right? Unless they're going to match the 70% that you'd be getting from self-publishing,
exactly.
Which there's no way they're going to do ever. So like they can say, I'll give you millions of dollars, but if they're offering you millions of dollars, that's because they figure you're going to be making way more than that. So you're better off just not doing it, right? So I think that the only reason other authors don't do it is maybe they are locked into some contracts, or I don't know, maybe they just haven't really thought about it. Maybe they're getting bad advice. Who knows, right?
And you're going to get a much smaller percentage when you're traditionally published, and and for the large percentage that the publishers get, you'd think that there's more that they would do in terms of marketing and advertising. But unless you're a lead title, they don't really invest much in. They'll give it the bare minimum in terms of advertising.
Because I think that's one of the other things. We've spoken to some people who were the idea of traditional publishing appealed to them, because it's like, I just hand the book over and they deal with everything, which is kind of nice. But then how much are you actually getting for that? You give them what could be 60% of the royalties, basically. And then do you really get a professional editing job? Do you really get professional marketing? Do you and I'm losing a lot of faith that publishers actually provide value for that. I mean, I was going to ask about the process of getting your book publication ready. I mean, when I read it, that was before you'd even sent it out. It looked like it'd been professionally edited by somebody else in Chicago Manual of Style. Was that correct?
Well, it was actually I had it a couple times. I have somebody I worked with who was my editor for multiple books. She was an editor for this one. But I've also taken on editing clients. I use Chicago Manual of Style, so I also did a round of editing. And then I had a series of my beta readers that I've used that are, I made sure to pick people that aren't just going to read it and say, oh, great, I like it. I like people that are very critical, that are going to provide a lot of comments. And I was able to get that. And so I think it was a much improved book because of it. But between the rounds of test readers, the professional editing, my round of editing, and then I have one guy who's almost like, I joke around, he's almost like Rain Man in terms of his he picks out stuff like that nobody in the world would ever find. And you found a couple things that none of the editors were able to catch. And even that, all those rounds of editing, I found one thing which I've since fixed, where there was an end quote where it didn't belong, that none of the editors, including myself, caught. So there's always going to be something that's going to sneak through it. Even in many traditionally published books that I've read, I always finding things. So,
But one of the other advantages of, I was going to say, one of the other things about self-publishing is you spot a mistake. You have the autonomy to go in, upload a new manuscript, get it fixed within 24 hours, which you can't
exactly
do publishing.
That's true. That's true. I was able to get in, correct it right away, and from then on, anybody else that download it, we're going to get the new version. So, but I did make sure to really take the time to make sure it was edited. I made sure that I have a cover designer who works for the big companies, and he does on occasion does indie books on the side, but I always rely on him for the book cover, because people do judge a book by its cover.
Which is a very good cover. I think it's very good. It's a very on-brand cover, because Craig and we've done quite a few podcasts about how important covers are and how it's almost like a dress code. If you go to thrillers right now, like 80% of them will be a shadowy figure center of the thing, surrounded by, and it's, you're going to have white typeface and stuff. So your cover looks very much on brand for the kind of genres you cross over. And I think that's one of the other reasons why it's like, oh, this is something, this is on par with traditionally published books.
Yeah, my goal with it was, with the cover, the editing. I did my own interior design. I used to have, pay for it, and then I learned how to do it myself. And I watched some YouTube videos on ways to improve the interior design, and that helped. But the other thing I did was I created a publishing company. I got my own ISBNs, and I had a logo made for the publishing company. I called it Somerton Press. I figured it sounds like a big publishing company, but I live in the Somerton area of northeast, the suburbs of Philly, and so I try to make it look as much as possible like a traditionally published book.
Yeah, that's definitely key as well. I think it's helped as well that you've gone the traditional route and you've seen how they do things, right? And you were then able to, when you went off and self-published, you were able to take those things. You realized how important the cover is, how important editing is, right? A lot of people that start off with self-publishing, if they haven't done their research, they write their book and they figure, if I write it, they will come,
Yeah, right, exactly.
And it doesn't matter what the cut. Oh, it doesn't. I edited it myself. I'm pretty sure it's okay. And I did this cover up in Paint because I like this picture that I just downloaded. Then they're shocked when they don't make a lot of sales. And
right.
There's more that goes into it. But and you don't have to go the traditional route first to learn all those things, but that's one way to do it, right?
Yeah, it helps to see how they think of things.
Yeah, and so when you went traditionally published with your nonfiction, I don't know how long ago that was, but did they do a lot of the marketing and such for that? Or?
Well, the first book I had was a lead title, and it was called Napoleon on Project Management. It took lessons from Napoleon's rise and fall and applied it to modern day leadership. I wanted it to be called Napoleon on Leadership, because there were a lot of best-selling books like Attila the Hun or Patton on leadership, but the publisher felt, because I had a big audience in the project management genre, they felt they wanted to play to an unfilled niche in that area. So personally, that wouldn't have been my choice, but again, that's why you self-publish, so you can make your own decisions. But at any rate, that was a lead title, and they invested. They did do some advertising. I had some big coverage, oddly enough, in Canada for some reason. It got big newspaper coverage. They had me lined up for radio interviews, and I was on national TV in Iceland and all that. So there was a lot invested because it was a lead title. My other traditionally published books since, I expected the same treatment, and I found it was very different. One, because it wasn't a lead title. B, because it was marketed as a like McGraw-Hill Education, for instance. They were marketing, and it was like a textbook. Another book that I did, and they priced it accordingly at like $50. I'm like, nobody's going to buy this for $50, unless a company pays for it. And again, that was a case where I had no control over the pricing or how the book was treated or marketed. I had a snazzy title, and they came up with one of the most mundane, boring titles that you could think of that made it sound like it was dry, but they said they liked it because it had all the SEO words in the title. So again, it's not a panacea, as far as going the traditional route, but there is a difference when it's a lead title versus just something that they pick up.
It's frustrating too, because if they go and they make all these changes and they make all these mistakes, they price it too high and they give it a bad title, or they don't market it, or they market to the wrong group or whatever, right, and then it does poorly, then who gets the blame for that? Oh, well, your book didn't sell, so I guess we don't really want any more books from you. It's like,
right, yeah.
Maybe it would have if you did what I wanted instead of what you wanted.
Yeah, I mean, I still get royalty checks, but the royalties I get from the indie books are about the same as I get from the traditionally published books. And so that's one difference. Again, the advance is another big difference with the traditionally published books, is they'll give you an advance, so whether it sells or not, at least you got that. And so again, you're going to get a lot more with the lead title than you're going to get with just a book that a publisher takes on. they take on so many books, and they only give their attention to a select few, and most of them are going to be their proven authors. I lucked out with the first one because they were trying to get into Thomas Nelson was trying to get into a new line, which was their business line, and they had that as a break-in title. But the other ones that was I don't think typical of your average traditional deal.
Oh, Craig, we can't hear you.
Sorry. I think these days a lot of the advances are falling. They're offering a lot less for the advances than they traditionally were, and they also, well, this was always the case, but people have to realize that it doesn't matter what the advance is, like you still have to make back that advance before you see any royalties,
right?
And because the percentage is so low, it takes a lot longer to do that.
It does. It takes a long time before you start seeing royalty payments. Sometimes years before you start.
Right, and then if you're not getting a big royalty in the first place, you're not going to be living off that for too long before you kind of need to have something. What was the percentage that you were getting for a sale for traditional? Like, I know
for traditional, I tell you the truth, it's been so long, I barely remember, but it amounted to about maybe $3 a book, or at most $4.
Was that on that $50 title you're talking about?
Well, on the first one, I think I think it was selling for like 35, and I would have gotten maybe 10% out of it, 15%.
Right. Right, and then these days, on Amazon, you'd get 70%. So
yeah, right, yeah. So it's a big difference. Yeah, I really don't remember the percentage. It's been so long, but I remember it only amounted to a few dollars a book. And of course, the bulk of it goes to the publisher, and then the agent might get 15%.
So that's the agent's 15% comes out of your $3.
Right.
Right? So it's even less, right? So yeah, I mean, that's another thing that people have to keep in mind when they think about traditionally published, like, not just that the overall rate is lower, but there are things that come out of that rate that make it even worse. So, yeah. So then, now that so how many books have you self-published now?
Well, let's see. I have three novels that are, well, the first one almost it was a small press, but I did, again, all the advertising and marketing. But after that, I did one self-published sci-fi thriller, and then the latest one is self-published.
And are you finding that
2.5, I would say.
do you think that you made the right decision then? Like, are you happy with how that's gone?
I do. I think now that I've learned a drill in terms of the things you really need to have, the elements in play. You need to have the book edited, test readers, and like anything, you want to be able to play to the market, have a good story more than anything. Really, in this case, I was focused on the characters and making sure I had a good story, good characters, and from there, you do need a professional cover. You need to have the book edited. And then also, I think the reviews were very important too. So I think advanced reading copies is important to use a service to get advanced reading copies out there so people can leave reviews by the time you release it. Otherwise, people go to the page, they see no reviews, and they don't know whether to take a chance on it or not.
Right. And that's always sort of how I answer the question. I even got an email today asking about, the purpose of reviews, right? And my answer is always kind of like, if you have two books that are similar that you're trying to decide between, right? And you have one book that has no reviews, and you have one book that has some reviews. The natural inclination will be to go for the one that has some reviews, because that just tells you that other people have read it. Other people have taken the chance. I mean, obviously, if the reviews are terrible, if it's 2 stars or whatever, then that might be a different story. But assuming that the reviews are just even slightly above average, right? You're still going to go for that one because people have taken that chance. Whereas you're going to look at that one that has no reviews and you're going to be like, well, no one else wanted to read it. Why do I? You know?
Right. Yeah.
And, you know, and then if there's one that only has a few reviews versus one that has a lot of reviews, it sort of it goes from there as well. I mean, there gets to a point where, you know, it doesn't really matter. Or if it's, you know, 20 reviews versus 25, that's not going to make a difference. But, you know, if it's even 100 versus 70, most people don't care about that difference necessarily, right? But but like if it's 70 versus 5 or 10, right, you're gonna be like, well, a whole bunch of people wanted to read this and only a few people wanted to read that, right? So it does make a difference for sure in terms of helping you make that sale, especially from people that are sort of on the fence, right?
Yeah. Now, one author was creative, Andy Weir. He wrote he wrote chapters individually, first on his website, and then people suggested he put it on Amazon. So he put each chapter on Amazon for 99 cents, built an audience, and by the time he finished the book, he republished the whole book. Had loads of reviews from people reading all the chapters. So there are loads of reviews, and next thing you knew, again, he self-published that. It was The Martian. Got picked up by Ridley Scott, made into a film,
and he's a terrific writer.
Yeah. And there are services now, and we've talked about those as well, that's the model where people read books chapter by chapter, like the Radish model, even the Kindle Vella model, that, you know, people sign up and they pay some like micro payments kind of like to read part of the book and then decide, do I want to read more? I'll pay a little bit more. I'll pay a little bit more instead of committing to buying the book all at once, right?
Yeah. And this time I'm spending more time and thought into the advertising, whereas the last one I relied on email blasts and discounts and things like that. The problem with that is you might get a flurry of you might get 1,000 buyers or 2,000 buyers, but a lot of those, when they're buying them at 99 cents, they might buy them. They might never read them. After all, they only paid 99 cents for it, and they may or may not be real, avid fans. So I think a hybrid approach was working out, where I'm working with an advertising company to do some Facebook and Instagram advertising. And I'm finding it's more of a steady stream as opposed to like a big explosion and then dissipate. So I'm trying that, and then I do have a 1 week discount, October 13th to the 19th, where I'm going to put the ebook for 99 cents for a week, and then I'll do a blast around that. But aside from that, I'm using more of a traditional advertising approach and aiming for steady stream of readers. It'll hopefully grow over time if people like it and spread the word.
Now, what have you got planned for your next books? I mean, one of the things that works very well for self-published authors is having a series of books, because then when you advertise that first book, you get people hooked in for all of the subsequent books. I mean, do you plan to revisit these characters, or?
I do. In fact, I set it up at the end to kind of tease a sequel, and I've already started outlining, and I have a lot of notes, like 3 pages of notes for the sequel. And pretty soon I'm going to get started actually working on it. I'm doing all the research now, because a lot of my books, I usually like to blend a little bit of reality with, like in this book, opens up with a heist and in the Brussels airport, and it actually was a real heist at the Brussels airport. So everything played out the same way it played out in real life, except they never found out who orchestrated it. In this book, I'm speculating that my character orchestrated it. So I always like to blend a little bit of, I got that from reading Michael Crichton's books, I think, where he always blends enough reality in there to make you think that it could be real. So I do a lot of research. So right now that's what I'm doing, and I have a lot of stuff outlined. So I am going to work on a sequel to this book. And the 2 other books I set up for sequels. So I have those lined up too.
Yeah, and the marketing approach that you talked about earlier works really well when you have multiple books in a series. You trickle in the sales of book 1, and then that just leads naturally to the sales of subsequent books in the series. And
I keep hearing that.
Well, but it works even better the more books you have, right?
Yeah.
And if you have multiple series, that's great too. If they're, if even books that aren't in series, the more books you have, the more entry points there are for a reader to discover you, and then they go back and see all your previous stuff. So
yeah, and I do have readers for my first 2 books, even though this is more of a thriller, whereas the first one was a time travel thriller, the second one was a sci-fi thriller. There is some crossover, so I think a number of the readers would buy this one. But I think when you have a series, I think people really get hooked in. Everything I'm hearing, all the people I speak to that have a series, they've really built a large audience because people get attracted to the characters. They wait for the next book, and so that's what I'm going to plan to do, is just stick with the series for now and then see where it takes me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you're going to always see sort of a natural drop off. You're not going to get 100% of readers of book one reading book two, but as long as you retain sort of a core going through it, you advertise one book and you make 3, 4, 5 sales out of it. So
right,
it means, what that means is eventually you get to be more relaxed on how many sales that first book has to make, or what the CPC rate is on it, right? Because you can maybe spend a little bit more, and knowing that you won't get back the money on that one book, but know that 60% of the people who read book one will read book 2 and 3.
Exactly.
Then you factor that into it, right? So it works out for sure.
Yeah. So I'm playing the long game here, because I think that's what you really need to do with these days.
You're building an enterprise. I mean, it's kind of, I was thinking, I've got 12 books in my series, and I'm advertising the first book in that series. And I know that, I retail my books at $4.99, so I get $3.50 in royalties. And I know I sell one on an average of every 12 clicks, which means if I'm spending more than 25 cents a click, I'm losing money. But if I can get one person to buy that book and then buy the second book, every single subsequent book is $3.50 of gravy, basically. And at that point, then it becomes so much more viable as a business model. And it is a business. It's like we become publishing companies for ourselves.
Right. Yeah. And that's where I'm in the beginning phases of that, is trying to build the audience. Right now, I'm spending more on advertising, in terms of the click through. It's you may not make a profit on it, but up front, it's not so much about profit; it's about building an audience. And then the subsequent readers is where the profit comes in. Then you can afford to have a self-sustaining model where you're advertising and generating revenues.
Yeah, and it's hard because you came from writing these nonfiction books, so it's not like you can really rely on those readers. As
there's some crossover, but for the most part, it's not like Right. So I all in all, I had 5 nonfiction books, and then now I have the 3 novels, and I told my wife, if I write another management book, shoot me.
Now, if you were to write another management book, another nonfiction book, would you self-publish it, or would you go back to?
That's a great question. Now that I've gotten my feet wet in the self-publishing industry, I think if I went back, I would probably self-publish it, because especially since there I have an audience, I have a platform, I have a niche, and I could play to that, and I think I would do better than I would with a traditional publisher. So I think I would. I think now that I know more about the self-publishing market, I think I would definitely take that route.
Yeah, you would have been able to make all the right choices that you weren't able to make before. Right?
Exactly.
And some ways, I've found I've got a couple of non-fiction books, and they're almost easier to market than fiction, because somebody's looking. I've got one on intermittent fasting, and it's like if somebody goes to Amazon, they're looking for a book on intermittent fasting. You're only competing against those ones rather than fiction as a huge genre.
Right. And now that I know that, I'll probably buy that book.
It's not bad. It's not bad.
Experimenting with it.
Yeah. So, well, listen, that's the testimonial right there, where you wrote these other books, you traditionally published them, and they were at first, I was thinking, well, how well will they translate? It's a nonfiction, and then you went off and did self-publishing with fiction. But here you are, after having that experience for both, and you're saying, if you were to do it again, or if you were to write another nonfiction book, and all of your nonfiction experience so far has been with publishing, or with traditional publishing, you still would choose self-publishing. So I think that
I would. And I could see writing another nonfiction book, but it probably wouldn't be another management one. But but I could see. But when I do go into that area, I think definitely self-publishing is the way to go, because again, you have more control over the look and feel of the book, the pricing, and you already have your audience. And I agree. I think with nonfiction, it is a little bit easier to sell because the audience becomes very apparent.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a little, with fiction, you can build up sort of this like mailing list, this group of people that are your fans through social media and all the like, right? And then every time you write another one, you sell into that. It's maybe not as easy with the nonfiction, especially if every book is sort of a different topic. Like you couldn't sell an intermittent fasting book to your nonfiction audience or to your management audience. I mean, sure, some of them might be interested in the topic, but in general, that's not kind of how it works, right? So
and that's why I keep my name separate. I mean, I don't hide it. I tell people I write the novels as JB Manis and nonfiction's Jerry Manis. So I have to maintain 2 separate websites, 2 Twitter accounts, and in fact, my agent, I noticed he represented Nora Roberts and Ken Follett and a number of other authors. And I happened to be, it was funny at the time because I said to him, "Oh, I see you represent J.D. Robb too." He said, "Well, it'd be kind of hard not to. They're both the same person." I realized that Nora Roberts, when she was writing books outside of her genre, she wrote them as J.D. Robb.
Right. So I don't know what your or what any sort of typical, I guess, traditionally published contract is, but is there a point where you would ever get the rights to those other books back, or different rights, or do they own all the rights forever?
Well, that's something an agent can negotiate. In many cases, they own the rights. I forget the. It's funny. I'm in the Authors Guild, so you can with the Authors Guild, you can call up and get legal advice, and that's something I would probably have to ask them if I wanted to take ownership back, or for instance, maybe they have ownership of the print book, and I have ownership of the ebook. I think in one case, I was able to sell the foreign rights to one of my books. Somebody had contacted me in Poland, and the publisher said, "Oh no, you can sell that on your own," because they weren't continuing to. A while back, they were selling the foreign rights, and now that passed back to me. So I think it varies based on the contract, but it's something that definitely, if you're signing a contract with them and you're working with an agent, that's something to think about. Is what point the rights go back to you. But
well, even with self-publishing, I mean, you have all the rights, but you can sell pieces of them off. I know with some of my books, I was contacted by publishers that only do audiobooks, or only sell books on ebooks on Apple, on iBooks, and so I sold those specific rights to my books to those companies, because why not? They were offering me an advance. At the time, I was like, I'm not going to do audiobooks myself. I was interested in just going through that whole process, and they were going to just do everything for it. So it's like, it's just another avenue that you can make money as an author by doing that. Especially if you weren't going to do it anyway. Some people would be like, well, I can make more if I sold the audiobook, or if I did the audiobook myself. And that's very true. But will you? And for me, the answer was no, I won't.
With one book,
will they do it? Will they do it in a decent way?
One book, I had a small publisher contact me, and I had a series of articles. And again, this was back in the management side of things. This was on lessons from the Roman Empire, from the rise and fall of the Roman Empire in leadership and what not to do. And so somebody had contacted me, and they had a series of books on lessons from history, and they wanted to publish it. And basically, they took my series of articles, and they said, they would assemble it all. They would add pictures and stuff like that, and then send it to me for approval, and I could, revise as needed. So I went for it, and they went pretty well. But although they didn't do a lot with advertising, and I was like half into it at the time. But
so we are running up to the top of the hour. But before we go, Jerry, what advice do you have for anybody who's sitting right now on a manuscript and thinking, what do I do with this?
Yeah, I think if they're sitting in a manuscript, one thing is, the first thing I would say is get it edited. Have somebody edit it, and and even if you're an editor yourself, which I am, it was like the old adage about somebody who represents himself has a fool for the attorney in court. I think the same thing as an editor. Yes, but
I agree.
So I think have it edited. Don't skimp on the cover. Again, people do judge books by the cover. Make sure the story is as good as can be. I'm constantly reading. I'm on my finish my third novel, and I'm constantly reading books on different aspects of the craft. And so I think that certainly the editor, the cover, go for a service that has advanced reading copies, so you can get advanced reviews. Have a team of people that you can trust, that are avid readers and that will be critical, that aren't, and some things you may not agree with everything they say, but take what you like and leave the rest, but at least you'll get some candid feedback. And a lot of times what I'll say is, once you've finished the book and you think you're ready and you think you have everything, let it sit a month and then read it again, and you're bound to find something and say, why did I do that? Or I understood at the time and now I don't. So you're always going to find stuff, I think, when you let it sit a month and then read through it. So I always suggest doing a final read through.
Absolutely, that's very good advice. I'm always like, even now I pick up a copy of my book and I'm like, oh God, how did I miss that?
Yeah. Same here. I'm always looking back and I'm like, what was I thinking?
Oh, well, Jerry, thank you so much. This has been a really fascinating conversation. Craig, do you have any more questions?
No more questions. I just, I would say that I think the main sort of point, I think, was answered a little while ago, which was, from somebody who's has done both now. And the question is, which way would you continue going? And it's self-publishing over traditionally publishing for.
I think in today's market, it just makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. So, and that's the sort of the point that we were getting through today is, whether or not it is a good decision, even when you've gone, both ways. And I think it would be for most people. Yeah. So. Yeah.
I might have said something different in 2006, but. But now I think it's definitely true.
So, Jerry, where can people find your books?
Right now, the new one, The Mirror Man. There's a couple Mirror Man books out there, but if you look up The Mirror Man by J.B. Manis, it's right now on Amazon in paperback and ebook. In November, an audiobook version is coming out. And I'm in the process of publishing it in markets outside of Amazon. So at some point soon, it'll be available on Barnes & Noble. At least the paperback will be available outside of Amazon. I did sign up for the KDP Select for the ebook. So that's just going to be exclusively on Amazon for at least for the next few months. But the paperback will be available in other markets. My other books are available, I think, on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and the usual places.
Well, that is awesome. Hopefully people will go and check that out. And thank you so much, Jerry, for taking the time to chat to us. I found this a really interesting conversation, and hopefully a lot of people will have found it valuable. So, well, thank you very much. And if you've enjoyed this, don't forget to leave a comment down below and let Jerry know that you appreciate him taking the time to come and join us. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, give us a like, all of that other stuff. And we will be back next week with another episode of Fully Booked. Thank you very much.